Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all feeling well where you are, enjoying your last weekend of lockdown for those of you who are lucky enough to be moving into tier 2 or below and getting used to it for the rest of us, unfortunately. No such luck for me either. We are waiting for a fair few people to come in still, so what we'll do is, as we normally do, start a little after 1400, 2 o'clock. So feel free to drop any questions you have into the chat in the meantime. The way I like to do this is that I will we'll look at the questions at the very end so that we can avoid the slightly embarrassing situation of me answering a question that is answered on the following slide. As you can see, we have subtitling thanks to exciting new update from Microsoft. It's not brilliant, but it is quite helpful. So please enjoy the comedy value of the subtitles saying something funny as and when they do. And yeah, we'll just wait around for another 4 or 5 minutes until everyone's here, and then we'll kick off. Thank you. Good afternoon, Rohan. How are you?
Good afternoon, Matt. Very well, thank you.
Glad to hear it. I was in with the interview people earlier on today, and they were all looking happy and healthy. So I'm glad that we've got that kind of across the board. Is Will joining us today, or is it just the two of us? Oh no, I can see him appearing now.
Yeah, I think he should be coming.
Fantastic. That makes things much easier for me because it means all the pictures in the presentation are correct. It's always embarrassing when that doesn't work.
Lots of people joining.
Yeah, well, it's enjoyable everyone's being so punctual. I was saying to the students this morning that one of the risks of Zoom is that because you can't really tell what other people are up to, you always run the risk of walking into someone else's meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's happened to me a few times when I'm in the middle of a meeting and someone else has joined.
Good. So we'll just wait on Will and then give it a couple of minutes to update. To update those of you, I'll mention this again once we've sort of kicked off properly. I can see quite a few questions about Bmat results. In fact, mostly questions about Bmat results. I'm proud to say that we saw this one coming, and consequently, we have a Bmat specific little webinar a Bmat specific webinar scheduled for later on today, which is, let me just refresh my memory, at
4 o'clock, I think, Matt.
4 o'clock? No, 5 o'clock it says here, because I'm getting a break. Yeah, it says 5 o'clock here, so yeah, 5 o'clock. Does that suit you, Rohan?
He'll have to.
I suppose so. So yeah, we'll be coming back at 5 o'clock to talk about the Bmat in particular. So what I've done is I've dropped the registration link for that into the chat. And I'll sort of stick that around again later on. But yeah, if you want to join us for the Bmat specific content, then that's the time for that. If you are not interested, if you are only interested in the Bmat, then feel free to disappear now and come back later, as there won't be as much Bmat as you might have hoped for in this one. But we saw that need coming, and so that's all set up. But yeah, so we'll touch.
So this one's mostly about Oxbridge, and the 5 o'clock one's particularly relevant for medics. Even if you didn't take the BMAT, it's a good idea to come along to it, because we will be talking a little bit about medical applications in general.
Yep, that's going to be fun. It's a busy day for both of us. I've got my big glass of water ready.
Oh. We got a William yet?
I can't see him popping up in the list, which is a little frustrating. We can start without him, I think, if we need to, though. Do you know his line?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm sure I can manage. I can ad-lib it.
Fantastic. All right then, let's kick things off. First of all, thank you all for coming. We're at 50. Oh no, there he is. He is. Sorry, here. Guys. Oh well, right. I'm just going to upgrade you.
We were just making plans to nab all your lines, Will, and split them amongst us.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would have been fine without me.
It was going to make things a little complicated for the bit where I have an argument with you later, but you know.
We've been rehearsing that so much, Matt.
I know, but here we are. So as I was saying, thank you everyone. We've got 60 odd people here, which is really nice. We have once tried to do this for one person, which was very quick, if a little embarrassing. So it's much nicer when I feel like we're really getting value in terms of the number of people and all that sort of thing. It's really flattering that so many of you want to listen to me bore on for an hour. It really is. So to kick things off, on the panel today is myself. My name is Matt. I look after our research work here at UniAdmissions, which is to say more or less everything that we try and advise people, tell them what to do, present as tips and expertise and things. My job is to go and be the expert to figure that stuff out. Rohan, you're next on this slide. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rohan. My background is I started UniAdmissions while studying for a medical degree at Cambridge. Worked as a doctor for a few years, and now I run UniAdmissions. Essentially, my role in the company is to continue improving our success rates and delivering and improving on our programs. I speak to lots of parents and students who are keen to get admissions to the top universities in the world. We primarily focus on Oxbridge and medical schools. And what I do is I do everything we can to ensure that every year our success numbers go up. So I'm proud to say that last year, just under 2/3 of our students got their places, and we're hoping for that number to continue rising in years to come.
And Will?
Yeah, leaves me. So my name is Will. I lead our team of consultants. So, you know, when parents and students come to us, I make sure that I or one of my team speak to them, learn about their application, learn about, you know, what the situation is, and from there, work out what the best possible route in terms of preparing and helping them get the most out of their application. Obviously, we get students coming to us at lots of different points. It's important that we're able to make the most of the time that they have and help them get offers.
Fab. Now, if you have enjoyed Will so far, Rohan as well, you can speak to them directly by booking a consultation. You can do it by visiting uniadmissions.co.uk. The book consultation button is in a range of places around the website. At the end of this presentation, I will show you the easiest way to find it in a beautiful GIF that I've made. And yeah, that's the best way to speak to Will or one of the other members of the consulting team, and they'll be able to answer your questions in far more detail than we can manage here. And that's you get a good 15-20 minutes, I seem to remember, Will, of really helpful advice and input there.
Yeah, it depends. I've been on the phone for 40-50 minutes with people in very specific circumstances. But there'll be a Q&A at the end of this. We'll try our best to try and answer as many questions as possible. But very often with something like admissions, there's rarely a simple yes or no answer. It often takes a bit of time to learn a bit more of the context and the background before I can say for certain, whatever the advice is. So yeah, the consultations are the best way to do that.
Fab. So we're at this slightly awkward part of the year at the moment where we have interviews for Oxford and Cambridge and for medicine coming up in the next few weeks. But we know that a lot of parents are planning somewhat further ahead than the next 3 weeks, which is officially speaking what we recommend. And so we will be talking specifically to parents who are thinking about applying next year. So for the 15th of October 2021 deadline in a future instalment of this, I believe on the 5th. I'm sure it's coming up on another slide. And that'll help us talk you through. Well, Rohan, you can tell us about the sort of classic program.
Yeah, sure. You'll be happy to know, I actually preempted something as well. So we created a poll ready. So of the 45 people that have answered this so far, just under 90% are applying for 2021 entry. Perfect. A handful for 2022 and only a couple for 2023. So for those of you who are actually applying for 2022 entry or beyond, this is the program that we normally recommend to students. It really depends, of course, on your exact situation. The first thing to say is we need to speak to the parent and the student before we kind of accept a student onto our programs. You'll notice that our success rate highlighted there is 63%. That was for last year. We're hoping that this year will be even higher. That doesn't happen by chance. One reason we do that is, well, there's two ways we achieve that. One is by having a particularly good structured curriculum that gives you exactly what you need in order to kind of complete your admissions process efficiently and successfully. But secondly, we do need an element of an intellect and effort present in the student. So we are selective. We only work with about 30% of students that actually contact us. So essentially what that means is we are choosing the best students and putting them through a fairly rigorous program. As a result of that, it does work. Now, we're going to go through a little bit more detail of exactly what that involves, but the key thing I want to point out here is we work with students from all backgrounds, all the way from state schools to top private schools, and even top schools such as Eton, Harrow, Winchester. They don't get anywhere near the number of the success rates that we see. So, for instance, the second bar that you see there shows the average Oxford success rate of the top 50 schools in the UK, and that was just 26% last year. And that number tends to be roughly the same. Whereas actually the average Oxford law applicant, for example, was less than 15%. So what we do really does work, but it does require a fair amount of work on the student's part, and also it's ultimately an investment in time from both the parents and the student themselves. So typically we work with students over at least 150 hours. The law program is just over 180 hours of study, of which 30 of those are done in a one-to-one setting. There's additional courses and seminars that we'll cover as well. But the majority of you are applying for 2021 entry, so I think we'll move on from here.
Yeah. Do you want to throw in a quick mention of the Head Start program, Rohan, or should we get straight into it?
I think there's only 3 people who are applying for 2023 entry or beyond. So I think for the purposes of clarity, we'll move on.
It's probably worth mentioning that they might be better off. Well, they're probably better coming to next week's as well, if next week's is still planned.
Oh well, that's this slide. Thank you, Will.
I preempted you.
Yes, so it turns out
We've
that
done this too much, clearly.
yes, it turns out you guys are smarter than we were expecting. So our plan was to do the 2021 and beyond session next week. That still is the plan, but clearly you wanted it this week. Oh well. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that next week, and we'll have a much more targeted set of slides for that. So, but don't worry too much about that in the meantime, because everything we're going to present now in terms of the interview support is still entirely relevant, just not relevant quite as imminently. And it's nice for us to give you a taste of what the business end of the process is like as well, because this is for us is the most exciting part of the year, where we get to spend more time with the students, where we get to see them interviewed, we really get to see the progress that they've all made. And it's the most fun in terms of the sort of resources and support we're able to provide. It's a source of enormous disappointment to me that we don't get to go and meet them in the physical world, but I'm sure everyone feels the same way about their entire lives on that front at the moment. So, so just to run you quickly through some of the things we've done so far this year that we're particularly proud of. We've worked with, I mean, I guess this must be 300 students by now. I should really update these slides. Something of the order of 300 students this year. And probably now close to 1,500 tutors, I should imagine, once the interviews thrown in. And that 5,900 hours figure is at least a month out of date. So I imagine we're at, well, 6,000 or 7,000, and well, there's 50 students working at this very moment. So we're doing 50 hours an hour, so to speak, today. Rohan, do you want to inflate these figures further? I
wouldn't say inflate, I'd probably say
yes, adjust.
Recalibrate them. Yes, I think we're on about 330 students. As you said, about 1,500 tutors, and we're well past 7,500 hours of one-to-one teaching now.
So there you go. In line with what Malcolm Gladwell would suggest, we may even manage to make an expert with the 10,000 hours over the course of the year. Although we're particularly proud of, and that 330 is inclusive of, it was 93 last week. I don't know if we've ticked up at all, but at least 93 students we've worked with through the foundation, which is our offering for students in lower access to higher education areas, who are receiving free school meals, polar quartiles, ACORN, all those sources of systemic disadvantage. And our goal by 2022 is to be offering a place on our foundation courses for one student for every student who comes to us on a paid for basis. I know this is a big goal of yours, Rohan, to reach the point where everything we do is unimpeachably fair.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately that does take time, but I think we've made some really good progress. And you know, sometimes when parents contact us, say, how much is this going to cost? Well, the actual solution is, well, it could be anywhere from 0 to a few hundred to a few thousand. It really depends on what you need. But if you don't have the financial means to support your child, please do still get in touch with us, because we have these schemes. We want to get as many, and our target was 100 students this year. We're very close to it. So if anyone here is thinking, actually, I'd love to join, but I just don't think I can afford any help, please do get in touch with us.
Yes, this is, in fact, if anything, this is the ideal moment, because we do have a target to hit. Yeah. and only a few weeks left to do it in. So it's always worth more when you're the last one rather than the first one from a target perspective. So to tell you a little bit about our research, this is the bit of stuff I'm in charge of. We weren't able to go to the open days this year, which was unfortunate, but we did spend a long time on Zoom, making sure that we were monitoring everything that was new information about the admissions process. We've been able to open up exciting new sources of freedom of information data, which gives us a much more granular look into how the admissions process actually works. That's also allowed us to update all of our resources in line with changes to the admissions test. So if any of you experienced an admissions test earlier this month, any support that you would have got from us will have been entirely up to date with the new specification of the exam, as they do have this irritating tendency to change them year on year. And we've been able to provide targeted help for newly computer-based exams, which was something we're particularly proud of, particularly given the challenges associated with the Bmat this year. That's something I'm really pleased we were able to do, because it looks as though it's going to have really helped. So to give you some examples of this, this is information about GCSE scores at Cambridge we've been able to gather, which is really helpful if you speak to the consulting team at benchmarking where you are in terms of other applicants and really understanding how close you are to making a competitive application, as well as giving people a really realistic sense of what the standards at work are there. If you're interested in any specifics of these, please do get in touch through a consultation, as because of the limits of technology, I sadly can't both do the PowerPoint presentation and the Zoom call and the Excel sheet at once. And so while I really appreciate any questions about this, I literally can't get to the answers. They're hidden under a bunch of other windows. We were also able to grab this clip from one of the admissions interviews, which I particularly like to use and think is really valuable in terms of clarifying what really matters. So hopefully that's going to play now.
I suppose if you are extremely interested and excited by things that are not related to the subject of English, like sport or music or something like that, that's great. But we're probably not that interested actually in that element of your well-rounded self.
I like to put this in here as one of the worries we get from parents, particularly parents who've had contact with the American system, is that they worry that their child hasn't founded a multi-million-dollar charity or done the Gold Duke of Edinburgh twice or learned grade 11 piano. And it's really helpful to remind them the nice thing about Cambridge and Oxford as well is that if you want to do maths, the important thing is to be good at maths. None of that other stuff is what the process is about. And I find that's really comforting for parents who perhaps been intimidated or are worried that their child hasn't done a bunch of other stuff. Which brings us to the pie chart, which I know is one of Rohan's favorite parts of the presentation. I'm not sure it goes so far as to say the favorite, but it's up there. Rohan, take us through the pie chart.
Thanks, Matt. So every year we get questions on what's the most important part of the application. Students often tend to overestimate the importance of certain components and underestimate the importance of others. So what we like to do is to kind of simplify things a little bit. And this slide does that really, really well. So to take you through it, essentially it's split into four major segments. So the first segment is your admissions test grades. The second section is your interview score. Third one is the exam grades, and finally fourth is everything else. And what you'll see is the first three are roughly the same. Now, there are exceptions to this. So if you're applying for courses like medicine, if you're applying for courses like biochemistry, where there's no admissions test at Oxford, for example, then obviously your admissions test score doesn't contribute as much as 30%. But a general rule for Oxford applications in general is 30% your grades, so those are your GCSE grades, 30% your test scores, 30% your interview. And then the yellow segment, which forms the remaining 10%, is everything else. So that is things like your personal statement, your school reference, and any intangibles that you happen to put in your UCAS reference. The whole point of this is to actually show to you that, well, for the majority of you now in this webinar, your exam grades are done and dusted with. Your test scores, you've likely set them now, or you will be setting them very, very shortly. The major lever that you can pull is the interview. And so hopefully you've been preparing for a serious amount of time now on your interviews, but even if you haven't, the most important thing you can do is start preparing right now, regardless of whether you work with us, whether you work with your school, or just do it all on your own. It's really important you start preparing now rather than once you hear that interview invite, because at that point it's just you're shooting yourself in the foot because you're delaying things a little bit too much.
Yeah, that's really important. Thanks, Rohan. And it's worth remembering that it's all of the segments that count, but ultimately it's the interview that's the one at the end. You don't get in without the interview, and you don't get to the interview without the other segments. So, you know, it's always disappointing when you have students who do brilliantly in every other stage, and don't put enough work in at the interview, because, wow, you know, it's the kind of thing you end up stewing over for years to come, as I may come on to talk about my own experiences later. As Rohan mentioned, if you don't decide to work with us, absolutely fine. We do recommend, though, as a very entry-level option, we do have Rohan's book, which is the 5th edition. It's been a little while since it's not since the summer that I had to proofread this for him, which is updated this year with new interview questions and should help you prepare. So if you take nothing else away from this call, I do recommend the book. It's very good, and I'm not saying that just because I had to read it and take out all of the errant semicolons over the summer.
And most school libraries do have copies of this, but if they don't, then we do provide our books for free for schools. So if they don't already, please do get them to drop us an email. We can't promise we'll get it to the library in time, but we'll do our best. And
you can find it on Amazon as well, as is where all books come from, as is well known. So some of this information is going to be a little out of date, but is good preparation for the process in general. So will you be invited to interview? Interview invitations have started going out. I believe that Oxford and Cambridge for medicine are a little bit are following on this coming week because of the Bmat just coming out. There's been a mix of people who have and haven't heard from those I've spoken to. And the chances of you getting an interview depends on your course and the university. So as Oxford, as Rohan mentioned earlier on, because there isn't an admissions test for chemistry at Oxford, they interview almost everyone. Whereas for computer science, for example, they interview relatively few people, and the test you have to sit in that instance, the MAT, is a very demanding test that really helps them to distinguish between the levels of applicants. One of the big wrinkles here is that Cambridge interviews a lot of their medicine applicants, although we think fewer this year than in past years, based on the information we have at the moment. It's very hard to tell until afterwards, unfortunately. But Oxford still only interviews around a quarter of applicants for medicine. So if you do get an interview invitation from Oxford for medicine, not only well done, that's a fantastic achievement, but you can also feel a little more confident in the knowledge that you're competing against fewer people when you get there, will be the case at Cambridge. We don't have as much data on who Cambridge interviews as we would like, as they won't give it to me. I keep asking, and that's because they interview around 70% of applicants, more for some courses. And so they don't release specific information, as it would be too close to being personally identifying. So the interviews themselves, what do we know? So they're all taking place online, with the slightly perverse exception of students in, we know for certain, Hong Kong, I think Singapore as well, creating the bizarre situation where if you're in Peterborough, you can't have an in-person interview, but if you're in Macau, you can. It's a little strange, but that's how they've decided to go with it this year because of the virus. So almost all interviews are taking place online. Oxford are using Microsoft Teams, whereas Cambridge are using Zoom and a platform called Whereby, which is particularly good for doing graphs and diagrams and working out and things. If you're not sure which platform is going to be the one for your interview, you should be able to find out either in your invitation letter or on the relevant university websites. Since they're in charge, they will have much more detailed information than we will. And certainly they'll have it quicker. So the Oxford interviews, we already have dates for those. Those are running from the 7th of December for 2 weeks. And the Cambridge ones are at roughly the same time, I think, give or take a few days. And those—
Cambridge, I know one of the first Cambridge interviews is on the 30th.
On the 30th?
2 days.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
early.
I did a poll again, and we've just got the results creeping in, but just so you guys are aware. So 40% saying they've got an interview coming up, and actually another 30% saying they've not heard back yet. So, and then the other remaining 20%, they're not applying for this year's entry. So actually, it's almost half and half who haven't heard back yet.
Okay, yeah, that lines up with Cambridge having them a little bit earlier and Oxford a little bit later, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a good share of BMATs, and this is what makes our jobs hard, right? it's 70 odd colleges, lots of different things to keep track of. So there you are. The Cambridge interviews are more or less the same time as Oxford, but also a week earlier. And we know that interviews for medicine at other universities, UCL, Imperial, Sussex, they'll be running from the end of this month right through until March. And I imagine the majority of those will be after Christmas to give them longer to digest the Bmat information. Or the Ucat information, as the case may be. So how do the interviews themselves work? This is hopefully the part of the presentation we can provide, timely, relevant advice. You've probably heard scare stories about them asking bizarre questions, why are bananas curved? How much water is there in the sea? All the seas. That doesn't tend to happen anymore. There is a kind of urban myth around these, trick questions that are designed to catch people out. While that might have gone on 15, 20 years ago, and being administered by the older members of the faculty, it simply doesn't go on anymore. The whole process has been formalized and made much more structured and strict in the interests of fairness in recent years. A close friend of mine is in charge of part of this process, and it's something that Oxford in particular take unbelievably seriously. So that means that every interview is graded on the same day, independently by each of the members of the panel. All of that information is audited and put into a system. Where there are disagreements, things are looked at again, and it's all done really efficiently and quickly, more or less in real time. And as I said, the chance of you getting a weird "tell me about a banana" question are pretty slim. But Rohan, you can speak to this because you've had one of these interviews more recently than I have.
Yeah, so I think, as you said, Matt, people get quite worried about kind of obscure questions. So there were, I remember when I was applying, one of the other students who was applying to the same college as me was very worried because they found out in the past they'd been asked what's the level of magnesium in the human body, and obviously that's a very difficult question. 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds are not expected to know the level of magnesium in the human body, even if you are applying for medicine. Doctors don't even know, probably. I suspect if I polled most of my medical doctor friends, they probably would struggle to give me a correct answer. But actually, when you kind of delve into these things, what tends to happen is that ultimate question is actually the big piece, kind of the final finale of the interview. But the first 20 minutes of the interview are working towards, and the process we used to call is tunneling. So essentially, you asked a very indolent, easy question to start with. So they may just say, what are the things, what are the elements found in the human body? And you probably answer carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and so on. And then they'd keep asking increasingly more complex and difficult questions. But it wouldn't just suddenly be, tell me a random fact that has no really bearing or relevance. It's really about building a picture. So what I say is, it's all about the journey rather than a destination. How far you go, that's important in the journey, but it's definitely not the kind of be all and end all. It's really, what's the experience of the interview? Can you construct a logical, coherent argument rather than kind of just give the correct answer? They're not looking for someone who is essentially Google. They're looking for someone who could, well, effectively create Google, if that helps.
Thanks, Rohan. That's really helpful, I think. So that's what they're going to ask you. But how are they going to decide if you did a good job? So this is another one of the successes of our freedom of information research. These are from Oxford Law interview assessment sheet that I was able to get hold of a few weeks ago. And these are the three key criteria they're judging you against. So the first one is application. Are you into it? Are you passionate? Are you interested? Are you desperate to figure out the problem? Are you the kind of committed, intellectual, thoughtful person that they're trying to find? The reason, can you do it? Are you thoughtful and skilled in your reasoning? Can you make an argument that makes sense? If you find yourself down a blind alley, digging yourself into a silly hole of argument, are you able to stop and get yourself out and go down a more productive route? And finally, the communication. Can you do all of this in a clear, articulate way that shows nuance and clarity and means that you're going to be pleasant to work with, because you'll be able to express yourself cleanly, both in speech and in writing. Now, obviously, the great advantage of these is they're helpful in any walk of life. So even if your interview is not a huge success, practicing these skills in any context is going to pay off later, particularly as if you ever want a job after university, chances are you're going to be interviewed again, and these same qualities going to be no end of help. Now, as I'm sure you've all noticed, this is Zoom rather than real life. So I wanted to pull out also from our research a few of the things we've learned about Zoom that really help with the interviews, to really try and pick out some practical tips. The first one is to practice looking into the camera, not at the screen. It feels a little unnatural, particularly when you're trying to read what it says in your notes at the same time, because you're delivering a presentation. But I'm hopeful that it really helps in terms of the experience for the rest of you, that it looks like I'm looking at you rather than at my notes. As I say, it's uncomfortable at first, so do practice. I find it helps to actually wear clothes. You can't tell, but I am wearing trousers. Some people even find wearing shoes is helpful. It doesn't do anything much for me, but I do recommend treating the whole thing as seriously as you would a real interview, at least in terms of the outfit. Make sure to take your time because of the discomfort of the online format, the slight delay in the timing of the voice, and just the general lack of body language cues. It's a good time to slow yourself down a tiny bit, be clearer, be more articulate, just be a little bit chill. It's fine. There's a whole lot of stuff you can't convey through the voice and the face alone. You don't have any body language, basically, so don't be afraid to slightly overdo your emotions, do a little bit more with the voice, a little bit more with the face. Really try and push yourself through that camera onto the other screen as an exciting, charismatic person. And that last point is really important. Make sure they can see you. Will and Rohan are both doing decent enough jobs. I've invested in a special light that lights my face from the front, which I find quite helpful. But little things like making sure you're not backlit, making sure that the light is coming to you from the front, that there isn't anything distracting behind you. All these things really improve the quality of the experience for the interviewer and it'll leave them with a better impression of you. And that goes for not just these interviews, but really any interaction you're going to have through these horrible machines while we wait for the vaccine to show up. So that brings me to the end of sort of the expertise part of it. The question now is, what can we actually do to help? I mean, we've given you all these free tips, but what else can we do? Because there's plenty more we can. Rohan, talk to us a little about preparation for medicine interviews, because I know that's the most urgent concern of our crowd today.
Yeah, sure. So the medical interview program that we run, the first thing to say is, again, we need to speak to the parent and the student to make sure they're a good fit for us. But actually, if we think you are a good fit, then essentially we break it down into three major components. The first is you'll get 4 mock interviews by doctors or graduate students, essentially who have done and gone through the medical interview process. Now, if you're applying for Oxford and Cambridge, your tutors will be from Oxford and Cambridge. If you're applying for non-Oxford universities, then there'll be tutors at relevant universities at UCL, Imperial, King's, and so on. You'll have the 4 mock interviews, and on top of that, you'll have 4 hours of one-to-one teaching. Essentially, the idea is that you have 1 main tutor and then 4 separate other tutors to give you mock interviews. The idea of that is it allows you to learn from your mock interviews, discuss them with a tutor who then becomes your kind of go-to tutor, they're your mentor, and they take you through the interview process. So the learning happens with the tutor that is doing the 4 hours of tuition, but then the actual experiential learning is with the mock interviewers. And then finally, we also have an exclusive interview intensive course. There's one happening right now, which Matt was leading. And then there's the final one happening next weekend. On that, you'll get an additional, essentially 8 to 10 hours of small group teaching, and then another 2 hours of, two mock interviews. So it is an intensive program. It is all done in a fairly short period of time, but it does, again, lead and deliver results. There are additional things included with this. So obviously, you get access to all our resources, teaching materials, books, the enrichment seminars that Will was going to talk about a little bit more later as well.
Yeah, and in case you're worried, we do have interview programs not just for medicine, but for other subjects. I have pulled out a slide for the economics program, but that's because I didn't want to put 25 slides in here listing different subjects, because I thought it would be boring. But that gives you a sense of the success we're able to achieve in different subjects. Oxbridge economics in particular is ludicrously competitive, and so our success is something we're particularly proud of there. The question we normally get to at this point is to understand kind of the variation in the packages, what we're able to offer. So Will, if you could talk us through a little bit about the detail.
Yeah, sure. So from subject to subject, you know, the tutors at Oxford and Cambridge are looking for similar skills and similar application. You know, someone who's a strong academic in engineering will be demonstrating similar skills to a strong academic in maths or a similar discipline. So generally speaking, the way that we prepare you, even though the specific content of the interview will be different, the way to do well in it and the way to prepare for it doesn't differ too much. Naturally, your tutors are going to be different. So if you are going for engineering, then you'll be spending time with engineering tutors. That's very important because, you know, it's important that their experience is as relevant as possible for you. But the amount of practice you need is still the same. And that really depends on you much more than it depends on the subject. The final thing that varies quite a lot is the enrichment seminars. Now, naturally, someone who's interested in engineering might be talking about very different things to someone who's interested in studying history. And what we do with our students through the years, so, you know, people looking to the years ahead, you might do this much more. But what we do through the year for our students is we have these weekly enrichment seminars on a Sunday afternoon, about 90 minutes each, covering quite a broad range of university level subjects. So, you know, on the website, you can see these on our program pages. I think the clips are usually about 10 minutes long, but, you know, it gives you a sense of how these things work and what they're there for. The point is not as a, you know, it's not a spoon feeding exercise. It's not a matter of watch these 10 clips and then you'll be a good Oxbridge applicant. It's really there to help springboard students into their subjects above the syllabus that they're used to at school. And it's so that when, you know, you're at the interview stage and the admissions tutors are trying to see, you know, is this student actually engaged? What have they been doing? What have they explored in their subject? You've got a wealth of things that you're familiar with and you've been reading into. They all come with pre-reading and further reading. And all our interview students that are joining on at the moment, they're given a huge library of these seminars so that they can go through, look at the ones that are specifically relevant to their interests. So, you know, you might be applying for medicine, but you might be very interested in certain aspects of the discipline, but not in others. So prioritize the things that align with your interests and do the further reading, so that when it comes to the interview, you actually have a wealth of things to talk about and you are able to demonstrate your interest. And naturally, so these are split off into different streams. So the medics will have one, the lawyers will have one, there's one for economics students, one for our STEM students, and one for humanities as well. So every Sunday afternoon, there's a lot of teaching going on. And yeah, all the recordings are kept for students to catch up on.
Thanks, Will. Of the different things we do at the company, this is the one that I'm the most proud of, both because it was something that came from us engaging with feedback from students last year to figure out where we could do more, and also because I go to them every now and again, and good God, they're good.
Yeah.
Every now and again, I feel like an idiot, which I'm not. I'm not desperately keen on, because I've been to Cambridge and I'm 31. But every now and again, I do get outsmarted by 17-year-olds, which is frustrating. But, you know, that's life, I suppose. Don't understand TikTok either. Now, to talk a little bit about what this all leads up to, because obviously this is ultimately goal-oriented, which is to say, does it work? And the answer is yes, it does work. We're able to get something of the order of 63% of our students in for Oxbridge, and an even higher number for students applying for medicine, compared with the national success rate, which is between a third and a quarter of what we're able to achieve. We're in the process, which is the big project for me between now and Christmas, of having all of our results audited by Ucat, so that all of this information will be 100% verified by an external body, and the external body that matters, so that we can take these statistics really up a notch and be able to show in terrifyingly granular detail how well our students perform relative to the mean, which is something I'm really excited about. Not the part where I have to spend 6 weeks playing with Excel, but the bit at the end. The other thing that we're really proud of is that people say nice things about us. Famously, this has been a source of consternation in all of these. No one has said something nice about Will in any of the ones I've clipped.
You don't have to bring this up each time, Matt, you know.
It's very important, but they have said nice things about Mia and about Rohan. They haven't mentioned me, but I'm largely behind the scenes, so that's to be expected. The real lesson is that Rohan is marvelous. Mia also will.
I'm going to delete this slide for next time.
But you can find more like this on Trustpilot if that kind of thing is interesting for you. And we're always happy to provide examples where we possibly can of students in a similar position, particularly when we speak to you in the consultation, which is why the context is so important. So that brings us to the end of the structured part of this, which is to say, this is slide 35. I only have 37 slides. So we now come to questions. I can see a good number of questions already appearing in the chat window. So what I'm going to do is start running through those, and hopefully there's a little animation of how to book a consultation is going to run quietly in the background, so that if you want to, you will be shown how to in exhaustive detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll back to the top of the questions and start there. So if you keep adding them on at the bottom, hopefully we will get to them all in time. But I believe we have a cut-off, I think at 3:30 today, something around then. If maybe a touch earlier if we run out of questions.
Yeah, so please do keep your questions coming in, and we'll do our best to kind of get through all of them. Obviously, if we aren't able to answer your question in sufficient detail, that's not because we don't know it, it's because a lot of these questions can be very specific, and sometimes you do require a fair amount of research. In that case, we may just ask you to book a consult with us or email us directly, in which case one of those three will call you back and kind of go through your queries in more detail with you.
Yes, it would be a huge disappointment to me if I had a job researching this process, but also I could remember everything there was to know. Thankfully, it's sufficiently complicated for me to have to look things up from time to time. So Raj asked, does this webinar cover all courses? We've done them, yes. We cover more or less all courses. I don't believe, outside of organ scholarship, there isn't anything that we can't help with. And I do have a lead on someone to help with organ scholarship now. John from my church, he's quite good. So we could probably figure out something even for that. Shivan Gupta asks about how Cambridge assesses the Bmat score. Rohan, you are the expert, having been a Cambridge medic and having done the Bmat. Tell us about it. She asks, do they score it like Oxford using an algorithm? Do they rank applicants based on their score in the distribution, or is it more complicated than that?
As you may imagine, the answer is yes to all of those. So unfortunately, Cambridge don't take a centralized approach when assessing the Bmat. So unlike Oxford, and we're going to talk a lot more about this at 5 o'clock, so please do join us for it. Oxford will use essentially an algorithm, which basically spits out your Bmat scores into it, and then it generates a ranking in combination with your GCSEs. Cambridge, the real thing, unfortunately, every single college does it very, very slightly differently. So the college I went to, the Bmat counted for 50% of my admission score. Certain colleges, they won't look at it until after interview, and then they put that into the spreadsheet. So it really depends. As you can imagine, the admissions tutors change every few years, and the policies do change. So it's just impossible to, and also they don't declare them through freedom of information. So it's literally impossible to know how exactly each student is going to be assessed. What we tend to say is Cambridge will never reject students, or will rarely reject students based on Bmat scores. You have to have done pretty badly for that to happen, and normally there are other reasons. But your Bmat does make a big component of it, and if you, again, take the 30% rule, that you're probably not going to be too far off that.
Fab. Yilin asks about the grades Oxford looks at if you are applying as an international student. So it will depend on the exam setup you're taking. I imagine from what you've said that you're doing the IB. I would need to double check the rules around the IB, but my understanding is they take into account your grade 11 and grade 12 grades rather than going all the way back to grade 9. Will, can you remember?
Sorry, I was answering some private questions. Say again.
Oh, right. Sorry. The years of grades that are taken into account by, for IB students. Hopefully you're an IB student, Yilin. Otherwise, this is going to turn out to be totally irrelevant.
Okay. Yeah. So they pay some attention to. So at GCSE, IB have a sort of equivalent. I can't remember what it's called. It's sort of like an IB diploma mini thing. They do pay some attention to that, but they won't go any further back than that, really. It's sort of equivalent to GCSEs, really. They don't really look back to your 11 plus or anything like that.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's there's normally very good information on the university websites about different international qualifications. But if it's something you want to get in touch with us specifically about, particularly depending on the course you're looking at, then that was really helpful to discuss. Bianca asks, any tips on how to manage anxiety during the interview? So the big thing I've been talking to our students in the students talking about is trying to limit the sources of unpredictability. So making sure that you know which room you're going to do it in, what time, maybe even what you're going to wear, make sure the Wi-Fi works, and really rehearse it like you would any other kind of performance. My advice is, if you want to feel less anxious, then you want to remove as many sources of uncertainty as you can. So rehearsing it, making sure you know how the technology works well, making sure you're happy with how you look, how you sound, all those things. I think if you can put everything like that firmly within your control, and so that the only things that are sources of uncertainty are the interview itself, that's the best advice I can give. Control everything you can control, and then focus on performing in the part you can't. But you don't want to end up being anxious about your Wi-Fi if you can avoid it. So I think it's really worthwhile, taking steps towards that. Even something as simple as making sure you're in the room with the best Wi-Fi in your house can make a big difference. We've had a few further questions from Shivan Gupta about applying for medicine as an international student. Because of the relatively small number of international student places there are for medicine, this is one area where it's really important to have a one-to-one conversation with you to understand your full applicant profile. This is a really competitive area, and so it's really difficult for us to make any meaningful assessments based on 3 or 4 data points. It's really something we have to talk to you in person about because the level of competition is very high, but also, and so the level of specificity at work is quite high as well.
Last I checked, there's 14 places for international medics at Oxford. So, as you say, Matt, not a lot, and there's a lot of people applying for it.
Yeah, so yeah, all the more important to get personalized advice as when you're in that situation, it really pays off. Oh, we've got some confusion about the technology. That's fine. Do we have anything specific for law coming up? Obviously, we have all of the law program provision we have, but at the moment, we don't have anything specific to law applications planned. It's something that we could probably do in the future, depending on the level of demand. It'll be fun for me to research because I thought about becoming a lawyer and I didn't. But at the moment, we don't have anything planned law specifically in the near future.
Just to check, Matt, me and Will are getting a few private questions. I just want to check we're not all getting the same questions, so it might be a little bit more time efficient if we just kind of pull them. So there was one question from Mass Ali. Is there a law-related talk soon? Is that the one you just answered?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So it looks like the private questions are coming through to all 3 of us. Just good.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. We have a question about applying to Oxford from Nigeria. I think that's a good idea. I think you should do it. Applying for the Reach Scholarship is an excellent idea. again, this is a really good example of when we would need to speak to you personally, because the complexity of these scholarships, of your personal circumstances, motivation, course choices, all of this is far more than I can go into on this webinar. But please do get in touch with us directly. And I'm sure that if it ends up being prohibitively expensive to phone us, then we can sort out a Zoom call or something along those lines instead. We've got a question about Cambridge interviews for architecture. We have a couple of students working on architecture at the moment, don't we, in the interview day, Rohan?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, because it's Cambridge, we don't have specific interview levels, but it's probably something in the 60 to 70% range. Again, this is one where it's worth getting in touch directly so that I can get to the spreadsheet, which if I try and do now will crash the whole presentation, which would be embarrassing, to say the least. And that goes for any of these data type questions. I can find the answers, but you will need to email me or book a consultation. Literally, it crashes the computer, which is frustrating, but that's life.
For those of you wondering how to book a consultation, Matt spent a fair amount of time trying to work out how to do this, but now I'm glad to say it's working perfectly. So what you're seeing on your screens right now is a kind of demonstration as to how to book a consultation, and it literally takes 30 seconds. So if you're wondering how to get in touch with us, this is the quickest way, and you can actually schedule a call and pick who you want to speak to as well, I think. Yeah, there we go.
Rohan, can you tell us a little bit about, Rohan or Will, about the format for STEM interviews? We've had questions about both engineering and physics.
What were the questions?
Is it more about practical subject knowledge or a more discursive sort of format? And the kinds of maths questions there would be. So if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so this is going to vary a fair bit from university to university and even college to college, how they do things specifically. Very often you'll get a bit of an indication as to how the college is hoping to run things pre the interview. So some students that I've been speaking to have been told, this is the format, these are the kind of things that we'll be doing. Generally speaking, with things like physics, engineering, there often are a set number of problems to solve. Sometimes you do some problem solving on your own, and then you come into the interview and do it sort of collaboratively with the admissions tutors. Other times they just all do them all together. So the format will vary quite a lot. Again, like I said earlier, there's very rarely simple yes and no answers to these kind of things. It will depend on your specific college. I imagine there will likely be a combination of specific set questions, specific problems to solve, as well as a more discussive section where you can, go through concepts a bit more rather than specific calculations.
Thanks, Will. I'm just going to run through a few of these quickly because I can see I've got 33 I haven't even scrolled down to yet, so I want to make sure as many as we possibly can. Galaxy A50, unusual name. I've very rarely met anyone with a number in their name, but I guess there's a first for everything. Asks about having a gap year and applying with A-levels. Does that offer a better chance of an offer? It doesn't really make any difference, if I'm honest. It's generally not recommended for STEM subjects because you tend to forget too much of the maths in the year off, but isn't generally a problem for humanities or social sciences. The great advantage of applying with your A-level grades already in hand is you don't have to worry about meeting your offer if you get one. You don't get the offer in December and then have to stress about getting that A-star AA for the next 4 or 5 months. So it doesn't make any huge difference to whether you get a place or not, but it is a little bit more relaxing as an experience after you've had the interview and hopefully the offer. Sophia Krugelova asks, how will you know if your interview went well? It can be very hard to tell. Often, what will feel like a terrible interview was in fact a good interview because they were pushing you. What will feel like a good interview was an interview in which you did poorly because they didn't feel like you could be pushed and you kind of underperformed. It's really hard to tell, and it's not worth beating yourself up over. The best thing you can do after the interview is take away what you want to take away in terms of next steps and learnings, and then try and relax and move on. You don't want it to be rattling around in your head as a source of regret for 10, 15, 20 years afterwards. That's not healthy. What should you ask the interviewer after the interviewer is done? Should you ask them a question? So I have an unusually strong feeling on this, which is that you should ask them a question, and you should ask them a question you actually want to know the answer to. For a lot of people, this is one of the few chances you're going to get to meet an Oxford or Cambridge academic, and they're going to answer your question. So think of something you genuinely want to know that you don't already know the answer to, and ask them that. It can be tempting to kind of show off by asking a question you already know the answer to, or something like that. I don't recommend that at all. I think the best thing to do is to come up with a sincere question that you genuinely want the answer to, and ask that. Because then at the very least, you'll get some new information, even if you don't end up getting the outcome you were hoping for. We've got some questions about PPE interviews. Will or Rahan, can you speak to, and law as well? Do you think you can sort of push those together? Is there I mean, they're different, but they're not totally different.
What are the questions?
Vedant Wishwanath, sorry, I'm not strong on names, asked about PPE interview he has an interview, sorry, to study PPE at St. Peter's. He'd like some tips on interview questions, and Heather Brown has an interview for law. She'd also like some advice about approaching the interview.
Okay, so the first thing I would really recommend is to do your research, regardless of whichever subject you're applying for. It's important you start doing consolidating your extra reading that you've done. Second thing is get used to the format of the interviews and get used to the type of questions that will come up. Now, it's virtually impossible to predict exactly what you will get asked, but there are a list of interview questions. There's some on the UniAdmissions website. If you've got access to the Oxford interview guide we talked about earlier, the book on Amazon, that comes with almost 1,000 questions on its own as well. So please make sure you go through the questions. A lot of the questions do have word solutions, but even just asking and getting your parents or just asking them to your child can actually be hugely helpful. So that's the first two tips. The third thing is really to get practice interviews. Now that could just be with your school. If your parents have the correct background, it could be with them, or it could be with us or another agency. The important thing is you walk into these interviews completely prepared, and actually so that instead of doing it for the first time, you're doing it for the 5th, 6th, 20th time, for instance. In terms of the exact details of kind of what you should prepare and what you should read, that will really depend on the student themselves and the exact variant of the course and the college you're applying to. In that case, unfortunately, it's not really possible for us to answer that without asking you about another 10, 15 questions. So it's one of those that please do get in touch with us, speak to us, and we'll be able to kind of give you more guidelines that way. But in the basics, start getting mock interviews, consolidate your extra reading, and start preparing with commonly asked questions or historically asked questions.
Yes, and I hope, Heather, we spoke a little bit about dealing with anxiety around interviews earlier. I hope that helps. We've had a question about interview focus for economics and management as well. Rohan, tell us your story about the PPE candidate who couldn't do maths.
Yeah, I think you've ruined the punchline. but yes, we work with students who are applying for PPE, and there are times when they tend to focus on particular aspects of their course. Now, that's all well and good. If you're applying for PPE, you need to be able to do economics. And a critical part of economics is the ability to do fairly complex maths. It's the same as if you're applying to do medicine. You won't just get asked questions on biology and chemistry. You may also get asked questions on physics or geography or other subjects. As long as you've studied those A-level or you've mentioned them in your personal statement, that's fair game. And that's important to understand, that if you're applying to a subject, anything in your A-levels, anything on your personal statement, or anything that would reasonably be expected in the course curriculum is fair game to come up at interview. So lots of time we get students asking as well, do I need to know X for my interviews? The answer is almost, if you've been taught it at school, if it's something that would be expected of a 17, 18-year-old to know, who's interested and passionate about the subject, then the answer is yes, unfortunately.
Fab. We've had a few questions about timing. Students who are expecting interviews for Oxford, those should be coming in the next few days. If you haven't had an interview invitation for Oxford and you are expecting one, I would say next Monday, it's worth phoning the college and checking. It's very unusual, but it has been known to happen that they just don't get everyone invited. But it's worth checking. Ultimately, in that situation, they'll either tell you no, and it would have been a no otherwise. It's worth checking, but you should be hearing back next week.
So yeah,
scheduling sorted. Sorry, Will, go ahead.
No, that's right. They will, you know, if it's a yes or a no, they will normally tell you. I think Matt's talking about something which doesn't happen like as standard. Generally speaking, we usually say you'll get about 5 to 10 days notice if you have an interview, and that's generally a pretty reliable rule that we've seen, that you can depend on. Now, Oxford interviews don't start till the 7th. The last one sort of a week after that. So if you've got your interview, if it's scheduled for the 14th, and Oxford has published their schedule for the different subjects, if it's scheduled for the 14th, you won't hear yet. It's very unlikely that you'll hear, and you'll probably hear, you know, in the next week or so. You know, when I said the Cambridge interviews, the first one's in a couple of days, that's because Cambridge starts a bit earlier than Oxford, and of course the people with those interviews were told about 6 to 7 days ago, so they had about 5 to 10 days notice. It fell within that period. So have a look on the Oxford website, look at their schedule, look at where your subject comes up, and then sort of work backwards from that, and then you'll have an idea as to when you should be hearing.
Fantastic. That was a much better answer than I had, Will. Thank you. James Benusi asks that he was unable to do the Bmat because of problems with his test centre. The school reported this to all the relevant people. Will this negatively affect your application? No. Obviously, it would have been preferable if you had done the Bmat, but given you weren't able to do it, that'll be taken into account, and they'll make a decision for interview on the basis of the information they do have from the rest of your application. We'll be talking in more detail about the Bmat later on today, so please do join us for that. The link is in there, and I will repost it at the end. But yeah, we'll be talking about the Bmat in more detail, and we can hopefully help with that. But my understanding from what I've read is that no one is going to be penalised for having had Bmat problems of that kind. Cassandra Ho has an extremely detailed question about Singapore. This is a classic example of a question that I cannot answer off the top of my head while I'm trying to do a PowerPoint presentation. Cassandra, please get in touch directly. This is a really good, interesting question, and I don't know as much about Singaporean Certificate of General Education A-levels and its integration with Nanyang Technological University, as I would like to. Please get in touch directly so that I can find out more about it and we can answer your question. But honestly, I do not know without looking it up the advantages of studying Malay language for applying to Cambridge. I know I'm disappointed in me too, but please reach out directly. This is exactly why we have the consultations available, because that is a fascinating and unfortunately far beyond my current expertise question.
Okay, Matt, we're an education company. You're allowed to learn.
Well, I certainly hope so, because that did make me feel very stupid. Kitty Ballantyne asked about how maths heavy the economics and management interviews at Oxford are. I believe that's one of the courses that comes with pre-reading for the interview, E&M. And how maths heavy, as we spoke about in the context of PPE, people tend to underperform in the maths element of the TSA. It's a striking pattern if you go through the data, how many people apply and are really good at the essay, really good at the problem solving, and really thoroughly mediocre at the maths. So while the interview itself may not be as maths heavy as it might be, there tends to be a lot of graph interpretation. In terms of the overall mix, my sense is that applicants tend to underrate maths to their detriment. I don't know if either of you have anything to add.
Yeah, so it's not as heavy as say Cambridge economics, where the maths element is just, you know, there's almost a whole interview devoted to it. But you still need to be hot on your maths because anything could come up. Generally, Cambridge will request double maths as a prerequisite, or, you know, almost all colleges will expect double maths. Oxford's tends to be slightly less lenient. So if the question's a comparator, then yes, it probably doesn't need to be as thorough and rigorous as if you're applying to Cambridge economics, but you still need to be very hot on it.
Fab. Thank you. As Rohan, talking about being an education company, I've very nearly finished my MBA that Rohan's been thoughtful enough to encourage and sponsor me through over the last year. And goodness me, is there more maths in economics than you would expect, as I've discovered. I think because it tends not to be the part that gets reported in the Financial Times or elsewhere. But behind all of those stories, there's a heck of a lot of graphs and an awful lot of Greek letters. So I think that's really worth preparing yourself using. We've got some further questions about the architecture test. Again, this is a good example of an opportunity to get in touch with us. I know a little bit about the architecture test, but I would like to know more. And that's something we can help with directly, particularly the drawing task. So classically, they would find a part of the college, leave all of the architecture students there and get them to draw it. I don't know exactly how that's going to work, given that it's no longer being done on site. But I imagine that there will be some kind of opportunity to sketch an architectural feature, either in your home or in school or in some other nearby place. But that's something that will be useful to speak to you about directly, because that will give me time to look up the specification and offer some slightly more nuanced advice. But certainly last year, my college, what they did was they left everyone in the chapel for an hour and got them to draw bits of the chapel, which, at least in the case of my college, was quite an architecturally adventurous piece of work, so I'm sure was a challenge. We've got some further questions about revising ahead of time. So one of our correspondents asks, when is the best time to start revising for the Ucat? I think this might be most useful for you to join us for our 2021 and beyond session this time next week. But Rohan, can you talk a little bit about the about optimal exam prep for exams like the Ucat and the Bmat and the TSA, and when it's best to start practicing?
Yeah, so essentially the answer is as soon as possible. It doesn't have to be intensive preparation, but I think you're shooting yourself on the foot if you've not even looked at a past paper by the time it comes to January, February. You don't need to do a full paper, but I think what we tend to get our students to do is to go through a full specimen paper, get a baseline of their scores. And actually the students who are on a Head Start program, we actually encourage them to take the Ucat and Bmat a year early. That way that gives them a baseline of their performance, and then we work intensively on improving it. Generally, if you're applying for TSA, Bmat, ECA, and all of these kind of intensive competitive admissions tests, you need to be, by the time you come to the test, you need to have sat every single past paper at least twice, gone through all the resources and teaching materials. And we've got an entire list of kind of resources that we suggest working with. So for instance, in January, you'll get told, here are the 6 things you need to do for the Bmat. In February, 10 things, and so on and so on, and builds up. The important thing is to start early. Don't do too much, because you will start getting sick and tired of it. If you're doing 3 past papers a week in the middle of February, that's just not a good, you'll essentially peak too early, and that's not good either. So the program and the structure we use does work, but even if you don't work with us, start early, peak at the right time would be my general advice.
Fab. Thanks, Rohan. Scott Shea asks, do you need to send a thank you or follow-up email to your interviewers after the interview? You can, but because of the way the interviews are marked, it will have 0 impact on whether you get in or not. The interviews are marked in the literal minutes after the interview finishes, and all that information then input into a computer. They won't be looking at their emails because they'll be busy doing interviews. So while you can do that, it's perfectly nice. It isn't going to help. It won't have a good impact. It won't have a bad impact. It will have literally no impact at all. I'm sorry if that's disappointing, but I'm afraid that's the way it is. They thought of that one, and unfortunately you can't get in purely by being polite.
Yeah, you might expect as well, you know, Oxford and Cambridge value the pure academic stuff much more than the US places do. So understandably, that's how it is.
I think you'd struggle to, imagine if they got 10,000 emails just say thanks to them.
Yeah,
probably be quite a nightmare just forwarding them on to the right person.
Yeah, chances are they won't see that email until days later. And similarly, should you send flowers or chocolates or wine, again, it's very nice, but honestly, it's a waste of money. It isn't going to help. The decision, the decisions and the scoring and all of those things will be going on long before they get to them. And things like that are only either a waste of money or are going to make you look a little shady. So I wouldn't recommend them at all.
If it helps you feel sort of completed with the process, then absolutely go ahead, send them an email. But yeah, like Matt's saying, it's not going to make much of a difference or any difference.
Chanela Tusai Suaga has a few questions about our offering for people of Black African and Black Caribbean heritage. I don't know if this is, and this is relating to the STEM seminar. This is something I'm a little unclear on. If you want to reach out to us directly via email, hopefully we can help with your specific query or through consultation. But I'm glad you're here and hopefully enjoying it, even if this isn't necessarily what you were quite looking for. And speaking to the question of background and heritage, if you're interested in getting in touch with us with regards to the foundation program, obviously that's an option as well. Yeah, apparently that's a concern for you specifically, Rohan. I'll leave you to deal with that one. Here we are. Let me see. We've got a question about the Cambridge Law Test. So the way the Cambridge Law Test is going to work this year is that last week, in the last week and next week, they're going to send you the test to do online, and there's going to be some kind of remote proctoring is the system. If you go on the Cambridge Law website, they have a fairly thorough explanation of it, but I haven't spoken to any students who've done it yet. Here's a good question. Galaxy A550, who has revealed their true identity as Caroline, or possibly Carolyn, lovely to meet you. I did wonder about that name, unusual choice on the part of your parents. She asks, I've heard that some students are called for second interviews at Oxford. What does this mean? Does it mean that you are borderline? I presume she doesn't mean the psychiatric disorder. If you can both tackle that quickly, because someone has rung my doorbell and I have to go and see what it is.
Yeah, so some people will get, well, so in a typical year, some people would get asked for a second interview automatically. So when I arrived at college for my interviews, I sort of got to my room, dropped all my stuff off, went down to the JCR, looked at the big board with all the interviews on, and I saw that I had one at Christchurch that day, the next day, and one at Wadham later that afternoon. It varies from subject to subject, whether or not they do that. At the same time, my friends applying for PPE, only one of them was automatically assigned to another college to interview. So second interviews happen. There have been, so one of my friends who was applying for history did all his interviews at Christchurch. He was at the same college, hopped on the train to go home, and on the way home, he got an email saying he needed to come back for another interview. So, you know, that did happen. Obviously, you won't have those issues this time around. But I wouldn't read into it too much. I wouldn't be disheartened by it. I would use it as an opportunity to impress them. You know, it's a chance to, even if you are borderline, they are obviously still considering you and they're still interested in you as an applicant. So it's worth not being upset about it or getting worried about it, but just making the most of that opportunity. Okay.
Okay, we've got a message from Vedant. I have to go now, but I just wanted to let you know that your TSA guidebook was amazing. Really helped me out. Thanks a ton. Oh, well, not a question, but thank you, Vedant. Always nice to hear. Where can we find economics interview past questions? Well, there's loads on the UniAdmissions website and even more on the in the Oxford interview guide, the book that we talked about. Here we go. More questions on the Bmat. So we've just run a poll, and actually 15 of you said that actually you're quite interested. We are hosting another Bmat webinar today, so it's a double whammy for us. That will be a much shorter one. Again, it's free. Please come along if you're interested. Matt will be going through what he's learned about the Bmat over the last week, lots and lots of numbers and algorithms to hopefully give you guys all the answers that you need.
It should be very exciting. I'm still not particularly good at the Bmat, which, given that I'm trying to do it 14 years too late, remains depressing. But, you know, onwards and upwards. P, asks about emailing the interviewers before the interview. Again, not a great idea. It's not going to affect your, it's not going to affect whether they like you or whether you succeed or not. Like you can, but I really don't see any point. This sort of thing, it's not going to help or hurt you. And it's just a little bit of a waste of time. If it were as simple as sending the right emails or the right flowers or chocolates, then we would have a much higher success rate than 63%, because we've looked into the favorite wine of each tutor, the favorite chocolates of each admissions officer, and we would have the system down absolutely flawlessly, and we would get 100% of people in. Unfortunately, there is more to it than flowers and chocolates and emails, so I honestly wouldn't bother. Edward Kwasa Karabuga asks, are you able to, Karugaba, sorry, asks if we're able to share our contact email addresses for further consultation. So the best thing to do is to either book a consultation through the website so that you can get us on the phone, or if you prefer email, you can email info@uniadmissions.co.uk, which is simple. Oh, look at that. Look at the subtitling. Isn't that clever? Oh, wow. I didn't know it could do that. There you go.
It got some things wrong earlier, which were making me laugh. But
yeah, subtitling can do email addresses now. So that's info@uniadmissions.co.uk, and that'll get that beautiful.
Yeah.
And that'll get it. That'll get it over to us one way or another, and we can help you out. Here we are. Humaraya Kokar asks, when should you expect a rejection or offer after the interview? Is it in January? So I got my rejection from Oxford, which is why I went to Cambridge, just out of bitterness, on the second attempt. I got mine, I think, about a week after the interview, just before Christmas, but that was a long time ago. Rohan and Will, can you speak to how the process works these days for Oxford and Cambridge, as he hasn't specified?
Yeah.
So it was a fun thing for me because I got mine on my 18th birthday, so that's probably the best present I could have ever asked for. Normally Cambridge will get back to you in the first couple of weeks of January. It used to be the second week. It's slowly shifted now to the first week, so you shouldn't hear by the 7th, 8th of the year. Oxford will, a little bit more variable. The only exception to that is if you've been pulled, which Matt spoke about earlier. If they think actually you're a good fit, but potentially not for the same college, then you may have an extra round of interviews, and then you'll get a decision by the end of January. Will, what about Oxford?
Yes, so I think I heard mid-January about my offer, which I think is generally the case still. What I was told at the time was not to think about it over Christmas, just to enjoy Christmas, forget about it. And then, when you hear in January, it's either great news or it's something that you weren't fretting about. Generally that advice is important. Once you've done the interview, we talk about that pie chart. Once you've done the interview, 100% of it is complete, unless you get called back for other interviews at Cambridge, or you're put into the winter pool at Cambridge. So at that point, you've done everything that you can. Be happy with the effort that you put in, be happy with the performance that you put on. And hopefully, that's enough. And you'll know within about a month or so. Fab.
Thank you, Will. Zainab Rasool has an excellent answer about the Cambridge Law Test, which I'm just going to read out. They write, "Hi, I did the Cambridge Law Test for the person that asked about it. The college emails you the details for the test, and it was done over a website called Moodle, which gave you access to the paper for a restricted amount of time. Our response was then uploaded onto the website, and we had 30 minutes to do so." That is the most up-to-date information I have on the Cambridge Law Test. Thank you, Zainab. I hope it went well, and thank you for sharing that with everyone else, because I did not know in that level of detail, because I've not applied to study law at Cambridge this year. Let's see. A few more interview questions. Humarai Hokar asks, if you've been to a couple of seminars that your interviewers put on, should you mention it? So this is more in the buttering up your interviewers space. Now, obviously, it's a really good idea to show your engagement with the subject and the material and your enthusiasm and passion. But again, making too much of your interest in your interviewer isn't a good idea. If you think of it as like going on a date, it's not a good idea to reveal during your first date that you've done incredibly thorough research of their Facebook and their LinkedIn and their Instagram. It's a good idea to let that sort of thing develop organically. And similarly, it will come across as a little strange and a little desperate and maybe even a little creepy if the focus of your interviewer becomes how much research you've done into your interviewer. It's about you and about your engagement with the subject, not about your ability to check up on what the interview has been doing. So anything that's subject relevant is brilliant and you should really, really emphasize. But if you're trying to figure out a way to impress your interviewer through your familiarity with the interviewer, unfortunately, that isn't gonna work. I'm just carrying on through. Avanish Midimale has a fairly specific question about maths, I think at Cambridge. This is another great example of something to get in touch with us about because I would need to look that up. It probably means that the implementation of the CTMUA is varying from college to college this year, but it's worth getting in touch so that I can find out a more detailed answer for that.
So I see this quite a lot actually. When it says there's no common format written assessment for mathematics, what that means is there's something like the Bmat. The university sort of agrees that all colleges will use it for medics, for example, for the entrance process. Equally, something like the ENGAA, that sort of it's university-wide that they use that. Whereas other subjects, a handful of colleges might use some kind of test, and it might be a test that it is different from college to college as well. So when they say that there's no common format written assessment for mathematics, so that'll be like a pre-interview assessment. What that means is there's nothing that's overly sanctioned. Most places will require you to do the step later on. But to give you an example, some other subjects in previous years would have done, only a handful of colleges might have done at interview or usually at interview assessments, whereas other colleges wouldn't.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question about the length of interviews, which I think is really helpful. Rohan, hopefully you can speak to this. Apparently, interviews for economics at Cambridge at Johns are only going to be 20 minutes. What are the particular challenges of a 20-minute interview? What are they likely to focus on? This is a question from Katie Card.
It's really hard to say what exactly they'll focus on. In a 20-minute interview, there's really not that much time to focus on any more than one, maximum two problems. So you may typically you'll get a few questions just to ease you in, icebreaker questions, and the last few minutes is just spent wrapping things up. That only realistically leaves about 15 minutes, which, as you can imagine, is not really enough to kind of go into significant detail. There'll almost always be a maths-related question in a Cambridge economics interview. But things like history, politics, macroeconomics, all of those things are very fair game. If you've not done any of those things, it's important you do at least have a background of them. Ultimately, whilst you may not have studied economics at A-level or even at GCSE, it's important you're able to compete with your peers. Now, they won't expect you to have that as depth of knowledge, but you still need to demonstrate that you've got a genuine passion for your subject, which comes through extra reading. So most of the time, they tend to be more academic, subject-based rather than kind of general. Personal statement interviews tend to be kind of reserved for the hard, I was going to say the hard humanities. I don't know if that's an actual phrase, but I've just invented it. So there we go.
Fab. Thanks, Rohan. I've got a couple of questions about interview approach, which I'm going to come back to.
There was one that I wanted to answer about sort of written assessments for other subjects. So obviously we've been talking about the CLT because that's quite a common, that happens every year, it has done for a little while now. If you aren't expecting, a formal at-interview assessment, then there won't be one. The CLT isn't something that's been sprung on people. So I think someone was asking about veterinary medicine. vet meds do the NSAA. That's sort of part of the application process. And they're not going to spring stuff on you. They might spring stuff on you at the interview, but that's part of the interview. That's not a sort of a formal assessment the day before or the week before, that kind of thing.
Fab. Thanks, Will. Shireen Schwa asks, in general, what is the success rate among those reapplying the following year? So I don't have at my fingertips data on this for all subjects. I have looked into this in the question of PPE, and somewhat unsurprisingly, the rate of success for reapplicants is roughly half the rate of success as for first-time applicants, which, given that you've had 2 goes, makes perfect sense. If you want to get in touch, this is a great example of the kind of question that is worth booking a consultation around, because we can do some research, we can get some more detail together for you, and hopefully come up with an answer that's a little more tailored to your needs, as that's the only data point I have off the top of my head. But I wouldn't be put off by reapplying. It does work for a substantial number of people. But again, it's worth understanding your application in context to understand the best strategy for you. And unfortunately, that's not something we can do in this format, which is frustrating, but is the burden of having still fully 52 people here that I can't give you the 3/4 of an hour of my time I would like. It was dreadfully unfair.
It's worth saying as well for reapplicants, a lot of people who reapply don't put it, they don't have the support that they had from school the year before. They are mid another degree or mid something else, and they often actually don't put as much effort into that reapplication as they might have been planning when they get that rejection in January. So you see lots of, so you can see the sort of acceptance rates by UCAS code. And Imperial, UCL, King's, those are all registered as UCAS code. And you see that actually students apply from there each year to Oxford, but very few get their offers because most of these people are doing it on their own. They've lost their school's help and they've got another degree to worry about. And what we find actually is that reapplicants can do quite well provided they're approaching it in the right way. And obviously you've got 1 year's feedback. You should have been able to identify areas that haven't gone well, what's gone wrong effectively. And then if you spend that year working on it, you can make sure that you're the stronger applicant. And that's often what we do with reapplicants that, did it on their own first time around and come to us to help them second time around.
Fab. Thanks very much, Will. Chris Flaherty has asked about veterinary medicine interviews. I'm going to leave that one with you for a second, Rohan, to think about, because I know that you specialise in the human rather than the bovine. P has asked about Cambridge economics interviews being focused on game-based economics. I imagine you're talking about game theory here. If you brought up game theory in your personal statement, then that's entirely possible as something that they would discuss with you. But my understanding is they're more likely to focus on macro than micro in most instances in the economics interviews, but there is a broad range of things. But if you're particularly keen to speak about game theory and you've mentioned it in your personal statement, then that's something that might well come up in the interview, or it's a context that you could apply to a question you were presented with. Rohan, has that given you enough time to think about cows and sheep and horses?
So it really depends on, firstly, which university you're applying for. So presumably you're applying for Cambridge. If so, the actual interview procedure and then the questions you get asked actually can be very, very similar to what a medic would go. So medics and vet students are actually put into the same course for the first 3 years, and then they kind of split off and do their own things. Things like physiology, anatomy, and biochemistry are all fair game. So it's important you're kind of able to prepare for them. Now, again, you're not going to be able to learn all the first year undergraduate subjects in, even a year. Most people would take so much longer than that unless they're at university full time. The key thing here is, again, get a hold of questions, do some mock interviews, prepare your A-levels, particularly biology and chemistry. Those are the most likely to ask topics. Essentially, anything in your personal statement, in your extra reading, is fair game. There's lots of questions on kind of how do I prepare for a law interview, how do I prepare for an economics interview, what questions will I get asked? It's impossible for us to tell you that. If we did, we wouldn't, our students wouldn't be on 63%, would be on much, much higher. There are 2 ways interviews typically run at Oxbridge, and we've covered them briefly, but just to clarify, interview 1 format is generally they'll have a preset list of questions that they want to go through, or a particular problem they want to pose, and they'll just go through that regardless of whether you covered it or not. The second type they'll be student-led. So essentially they'll say something like, what have you read recently? What are you interested in? And then they'll ask you follow-up questions on that. Sometimes it can be a mixture. So when you're asking questions like, is there a game theory? Do I need to know anatomy? It really is what you want to make of the interview, but just be prepared that whatever you prepared may not come up at all.
Thanks, Rohan. That's really helpful. Sophia Lane has a technical question about the Cambridge Law Test. I would double check in your junk mail and all those other places to check you haven't been sent a link that you've missed. If you haven't received a link to do the test, but you have been invited for an interview, worth getting in touch with the college to make sure it isn't a technical error and make sure you can get hold of that test link. Unless you're in the unlikely position that you're going to do an in-person interview in Hong Kong or Singapore, you will be doing it online, but worth checking. If you can't find it in your junk mail or anywhere else, do get in touch with the college so they can sort you out for a link if that hasn't worked properly on their part. It is, I agree, odd that you haven't had the link through yet. But again, this is, I can't remember the name, I think it was Zainab Zainab Rasul is the expert on this one. So if they want to chip in the chat, then they may have a more helpful piece of information than I do. Maybe there's a 48-hour delay between the two, who can say. So as Rohan said, we're going to be wrapping up in the next couple of minutes. So if you want to squeeze any last minute questions in now, Will, are there any questions that we feel we should have asked you, but we haven't?
It's normally questions on pricing. So we normally get what you know, how much is a service? How do I start preparing? How do I get started? Those kind of questions, Will.
Yeah, sure. So I think we had it on a slide earlier. Right. Yeah. So we had it on a slide earlier. Yeah, there we go. So it will depend a lot on you. You know, some students will come to us and I will say that I don't think there's a program right for them. Please, you know, don't be offended by this. It'll be because, you know, there's not time or it's not the right fit or, you know, any number of reasons. We only take on a certain number of students each year. But yeah, no, so starting from around 795, depending on the extent of the support and the time that we have to do it in, really. All right. And of course, we'll be able to assess that from chatting with you.
Fab. Thanks, Will. Shireen asks whether there is a recording. I believe that a recording gets sent out to everyone who's registered for the session. If not automatically, then certainly normally.
Yeah.
I will be popping the recording up on Dropbox for everyone else to administer as soon as this is over. And hopefully we can make sure that gets sent over to you, Shireen. If it doesn't, please remind us and we will sort it out.
It usually gets sent through it usually takes a few days, so it won't be sent through tomorrow, but you know, at some point this coming week, you should be able to see it all.
Yeah, and we're happy to share those links for this if you get in touch directly through email, which is info@uniadmissions.co.uk. Parvathy, I think we'll take this as our last question, as this rounds us nicely into thinking about next week's session, which I'm going to plug. Parvathy asks, I'm a student currently in year 12 and I want to apply to medicine at Oxford, but I would only be 17 when the course starts. So presumably Parvathy was born in December of the year rather than September or whatever. Should I apply for deferred entry next year or apply in 2 years' time? What do you recommend, Rohan? Medicine at Oxford if you're not going to be 18 quite in time.
Yeah, so Oxford requires applicants to be 18 by the 1st of November, the year that they start. So if you're not going to be 18 on the 1st of November in your first year, essentially, you have two options. One is you apply for another medical school. The second is you apply for deferred entry, or the third is you apply in 2 years' time. And you can apply for deferred entry. That's generally my recommended advice. It allows you to go through the application process in case you're not successful. Then at least you've got a year's worth of experience, and you can give it a go and do it again if need be. So yeah, my general recommendation is deferred entry. There are some instances in which deferred entry is not advisable, but again, it's best to speak to us. for more details of that.
Fab. Thank you, Rohan. And Sharina's asked that we pop the links in the Parents WhatsApp group. I'm not privy to the Parents WhatsApp group, but I'm sure that that certainly sounds possible. And you're smiling, so I think it should be fine. So just finally to follow up from Parvati's question, obviously a lot of you will be thinking about applying to start next year or even further in the future, thinking about the October 21 deadline and later. Because of the awkward time of year we are at, where it's sort of half people who are getting ready for their interviews in the next few weeks and half people who are planning ahead. This is the last version of this presentation I'm doing, which is disappointing for me because it means I have to do new slides. Well, I was happy with these ones. So from next week in this 2 o'clock time slot, we're going to be talking about students who are applying for the October 21 deadline and beyond. So that's students who have plenty of time to prepare rather than those who are worrying about interviews between now and Christmas. That's going to be on Saturday, the 5th of December. That's going to be running from 2 o'clock. I'm going to make a whole new set of slides, probably with the same template, but new slides. And we're going to be offering advice and guidance on planning how to do this over the course of 9 months rather than over the course of a few weeks. So that's going to be much more in depth into the content of the programs, about our approach, about the evidence and the results we've been able to achieve, the things that we've found really pay off, and really understanding this in a long-term holistic kind of sense, with much less emphasis on interviews. And if you are particularly keen, sadly I don't have a slide for this one, we are having a Bmat session in just under 90 minutes. Rohan, if you can drop the link back into the chat for me.
Yeah.
We're having a follow-up Bmat session from 5 o'clock for people who have received their Bmat results yesterday morning and have questions. We're going to be presenting some of the information we have, some of our expectations around how it will be used, and we'll be doing a big Q&A about the Bmat and the impact it's going to have on people's applications. So if you're interested in the Bmat, please join us for that. Otherwise, we hope to see you on Saturday the 5th for people who are planning ahead. And we hope to speak directly to you through the consultations, to all of you, regardless of your application stage, so that we can do everything we can to help in the coming days and coming days and weeks. If either of you have anything to add, otherwise, I'm going to let you go for fully an hour and 20 minutes of rest, and then I'm going to bring you back like a horrible time.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Will.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming along and for all your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Please do get in touch if you have any questions that we can answer, and please do get in touch if you have questions that you don't think we can answer, because we enjoy the challenge. Have a marvelous weekend, and see you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.